Our guest today knows exactly what happens when boys grow up watching men solve problems by hitting the bottle or hitting with their fists. Richie Hardcore is a national Muay Thai champion who has dedicated his life to solving a problem that is killing our boys: stereotypical masculinity. Before we jumped on, Richie said he tried not to use the term toxic masculinity because that is also a really harmful narrative that our boys are consuming about manhood and themselves right now. Richie walks into schools across New Zealand and Australia and has conversations that most adults are actually too scared to have, telling teenage boys that it's okay to have feelings, it's okay not to be okay, and it's okay to be confused about how to be a good man. Richie teaches them that you don't have to perform manhood every single day to be a man. As a white ribbon ambassador and TEDx speaker on unhealthy masculinity, Richie is fighting to end men's violence against women by going straight to the source, teaching boys a different way before the damage is done. Richie founded the Rise Above Charitable Trust to work with incarcerated young men, and he's passionate about one thing: breaking cycles before they break people. This isn't academic theory. Richie's entire advocacy comes from somewhere deeply personal. And in this conversation, he's going to share with us why this work matters to him so much and what's at stake if we keep raising boys the way we've always done. Let's get to the podcast. Hi, I'm Danielle, and I'm so glad that you're here because together we're going to work through big stuff. Richie, hey, and welcome to Big Stuff.
Hi, thanks. Thanks for having me. I appreciate
Absolutely.
your interest in talking.
I am so interested in talking. I really, really respect the work that you're doing. I've been stalking you online for a long time, not in a creepy way, in a nice way. Because I think the conversations that you're having are just so, so important. So yeah, I just want to start by saying, bloody hell, you're doing good work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always feel a bit sheepish when people say stuff like that. But yeah, thanks. I get a lot. It's rewarding, like it's mutually beneficial, I get a lot out of it. It makes my life purposeful, and I like to have conversations with boys and young men and older men and parents and women too about stuff that we never talked about coming up. I'm a Xennial, so these conversations were not part and parcel of our educational system or even our broader cultural norms. So I feel really happy to be part and parcel of that cultural change making every day.
Amazing. I'm interested. Am I going to go? You just said that I feel really uncomfortable when people say like these things. What do you think that's about?
People were like, "Oh, thanks for doing this work," and I'm like, "Well, everyone should be," I don't like, I don't know. I put this thing out the other day talking about the high prevalence of young women who are being physically harmed through what pornography is mainstream sexual practice.
Yeah.
And people are, "Oh, thanks for talking about this or approaching this topic," and I'm like, well, why wouldn't you? It just seems quite normal to me to be doing this work because I've done it for a long time now. And I don't know, I just feel kind of awkward when people are effusive with their praise.
Yeah. I think it's such a funny thing for us, as humans, that if someone was giving us like constructive feedback or even criticism, we'd be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna really absorb that. But when somebody says something really lovely, we're like, oh gosh, this is really uncomfortable.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some latent like childhood insecurity behind all that as well. And New Zealand has a particularly self-effacing culture. Like New Zealand has a really, really strong tall poppy culture. We hate people when they're too successful. So I suppose perhaps part of that plays out whenever I'm like, oh no, no big deal. Because here in New Zealand we are pretty harsh to people who are different or who might be seen to be putting themselves on a pedestal. So just letting you know,
Yeah, so
Danielle,
be cool, man. So
Yeah,
be
yeah.
cool. Yeah. I'm just like trying to do my thing.
I feel like Australia is not like that. I feel like I've spent a lot of time working and hanging out in Australia, and Australians seem more celebrating of success and more aspirational, perhaps.
I think it depends on the circles that you're in. I think that tall poppy is very much a thing here. I think the term was coined here because
I don't know
Australians
that.
love to. I think so. Yeah, we love to pull down people who appear to be getting up themselves or a bit full of themselves, or just standing out for being great. So there is definitely a bit of a culture of shrinking to fit in. And I say, fuck that. I say that era is over. You can be humble and stand out. And I think that's all about the way that you come across. And you very much come across as that. You come across to me as a really humble, thoughtful man. And let's talk about, your views on healthy masculinity and breaking cycles of violence. Why is this mission so important for you?
Yeah, I've been talking about gender violence prevention for I don't know, over 20 years, I suppose. First in a activist advocacy sense, as I had emerging organic understandings around why there's so much violence by men towards women. And then as the work's gone on, why there's so much violence by men towards other men, or why there's so much violence by men towards ourselves, if we think, like substance abuse or suicide. Uh, yeah, it's, pretty public record that I grew up with my dad struggled with his mental health and was a severe alcoholic, and we had some family harm as part and parcel of my childhood. Uh, right up until my adolescence, and yeah, that shaped my worldview and my sensitivities, and does underpin on a personal level, I guess, why I continue to do the work I do and talk about things I talk about. As I've gotten older, I've also come to realize that no man desires to be harmful to his family. Like, how do you help boys and men who grow up in their own dysfunctional situations, who are acculturated towards a particular model of manhood and masculinity, who are perhaps prevented from expressing themselves honestly, authentically, to seek help? How do you help them get out of that? Like, we need, as boys and men, to give each other the social permission to step outside of that box, because years of work, and obviously there's a huge research base that supports this, shows that the more you try and live in this, sing heaps of piss, be tough, have fast cars, have lots of girlfriends, brag about how much money you make, push your feelings down, don't be seen to be feminine. The worst thing you can do is to be soft and vulnerable. The more you live up to that, the worse it is for you mentally and psychologically. And then we explode or self-combust, and we hurt ourselves and we hurt people around you, right? So I carry a lot
Yeah.
of compassion for men. Doesn't excuse perhaps the harms that they're creating and the hurt that they're causing, but in order to fix it, you have to understand it. And I think if we are really genuine about the work, it's not about othering and blaming and shaming. It's about calling in and having these long, hard, difficult, cultural change-making conversations. And it takes a long time, and it requires a lot of patience. And I think as an educator and someone who really tangibly works in the space, you have to work on yourself first and foremost. I see a lot of activists or well-meaning people, or even professional people, their lens is colored by all the harm that they've either experienced personally or that they see in the day-to-day. And it's totally natural to be indignant or furious or angry, or all of the above. And but if you're not on top of that, it can really get in the way of doing the work, I think. And doing the work is really murky and gray and requires you to
It's so uncomfortable. It's so
or
uncomfortable to do the work.
you can't sit in the room with a man who's been domestically violent and expect the same tone that a social media activist uses in online spaces to work in real
Mm,
life, right? So you actually have to sit and get to the bottom of this sort of stuff. And that requires, yeah, like a broader, bigger picture and your own self-work, you know? I think a lot of people get to this work like myself who've had uncomfortable experiences or difficult experiences or experienced high levels of, you know, violence or sexual abuse. And the people I see doing it the best are the ones who have worked really hard on themselves through a whole range of modalities to do some healing and turn all that darkness into something like that shines a lot of light.
beautiful. You mentioned that you grew up with substance abuse in your home and then some family harm. And that, I'm going to assume, shaped your vision of what masculinity was. How did you get from there to, I suppose, like wanting it to be different or doing the work yourself? Like, how did you break that trope just even for yourself before you could do it for others?
Yeah, no, interestingly, I didn't lean into masculine norms as a teenager. I was actually quite countercultural from a young age, at least to start with. Like right up until I was like 15, 16, I was very atypical in my self-expression. Like I went to like a boys' school that was really
And that's where that shit
high.
lives,
Yeah,
right?
it's like high a lot of the time, not always. I think it's a
Yeah.
lot better now because I work in boys' schools and schools are doing an awesome job. You know, I've spoken at
Yeah.
a lot of schools in Australia, spoken at a lot of schools here in Aotearoa, and it is getting better. I think we need to put that first and foremost out there. Otherwise, there's no point in doing any of it. Stuff
Yeah.
is getting better in lots of ways, but yeah, a lot of stuff still endures. So for me, it was like a lot of bullying, a lot of actual quite serious physical violence, and it's a group of boys who are into like punk and alternative music with pink hair and nose rings, and like we wore flamboyant clothes and kilts. Like it kind of sucked, right? I didn't drink. I rejected alcohol from a pretty young age because of my dad's alcoholism, and I was surrounded by a real heavy drinking peer crowd. I experimented with alcohol and stuff as I got older, but then I was always like really hesitant about it quite explicitly because of what I saw and had experienced at home, right? You know, as I got older, I moved away from like alternative, sort of grungy, sort of navel gazing stuff and got into this scene of music called hardcore. And the hardcore scene had a lot of like really positive messages in it about being a political person, living your life quite explicitly values driven. So there's this whole subculture of straight edge, which is like the conscious rejection of alcohol, drugs, and intoxication in order to, and they seem to say like sober mind for the revolution, you know. And they really
Mm.
believe that if you were drinking, if punk was about like being against the mainstream, then sobriety as a conscious choice, not because you're an addict or you're in recovery,
Yeah.
but because you want to be different, was hyper anti-establishment. And that really gravitated to me as a kid who had so much like dysfunction in my own life because of my dad's alcoholism, and then went to a high school where and had a peer group where binge drinking and street fights and like a lot of violence and harm happened because of alcohol being in the mix. So when I was exposed to the straight edge scene, I was like, oh, this is like the promised land. There's a group of people who are not teasing me for not doing drugs. Here are a group of people who are not giving me a hard time and actively encouraging me to not drink, like older guys with a cool style. So
That's the thing, right? That you imagine that the punk sort of scene is like super loose, loads of booze and drugs. And, you found this subculture
well,
that was cool. So it's
yeah,
not like they were straighty 180, so they were boring. They were cool. They were
yeah,
hip. They invited you in. They were edgy and they had the same value set that you had.
yeah, totally. Like I think the English punk scene, if you're thinking of like, the 70s,
Curse and mohawks.
yeah, yeah, and yeah, safety pins through your nose and huffing
Yeah.
glue, sniffing glue and solvents, like, and abusing alcohol. I was around that too. But I have a friend, and he was like, punk's kind of like, fuck that. And hardcore's kind of like, let's fix that. Do you know what I mean? It's very angry, aggressive music. It's not like sonically easy listening, but I think the messages were really important, and I continue to listen to it. Like, I
Is that
changed
where
my
Richie
name.
Hardcore came
Yeah,
from?
that's where Richie Hardcore comes from. It was that, and also the combination of I got reasonably good at Muay Thai and kickboxing here in New Zealand, and changed. That was my ring name, so I like legally changed my name when I was like 20, in my 20s. So I was fortunate that while my home life had its problems, it wasn't all bad. It wasn't like once war or
Sure.
anything, but it definitely is, looking back from a professional space, a really dysfunctional environment. I had a really cool peer crowd, right? And that really allowed me to find healthy male role models around me through both the gym, through Muay Thai and kickboxing, and then through the music club that I was involved in. It wasn't all perfect. I've still had to do a lot of unlearning and deconditioning or decolonizing my thinking around a lot of things because of the broader culture we all grew up in. But I'm really grateful that I had people around me who encouraged me to think more critically about the messages society was teaching me.
What your mum? Was your mum like approving, supportive? Did she like the kilt? Like was your where was your mum in all of this? Because, when I think about, a dysfunctional home where a dad is struggling, uh, I I wonder, for you to come through and be feeling like you can be outside the box, was there a supportive person in that home space that just accepted you for who you were and made you feel safe?
My mom is like trying to raise two boys in a really dysfunctional, emotionally abusive marriage, So she was trying her best with what she had, I
Yeah.
suppose. And like, I love my mom. Like, she's great.
Yeah, no shade.
But
Mums are doing their best. Parents are
yeah,
generally doing their best, right?
but I think like my mom didn't really understand me. And actually, when my dad got into recovery when I was an older teenager, like at 17, 18, 19, my dad got sober for quite a while, got on the wagon, fell off it, got on the wagon, fell off it. I actually did, as an older guy, like have a dad who was more accepting of like my combat sports, for example. My mother always thought that I wasn't applying myself at my studies, which I wasn't, but that wasn't my focus, in high school. And I would just live it. I wanted to go to Taekwondo at the community hall. And then as I got older and learned to drive, I wanted to go do Muay Thai. And like, I wasn't that hyped on my homework. And like, I don't know, like, I don't know, for some reason, my dad sort of seemed to get it a bit more. Uh, and yeah, it's an interesting question.
It's an interesting dichotomy as well to feel more understood by the parent who seems the most dysfunctional.
Yeah, well, yeah,
You
definitely.
know,
And
yeah,
yeah, it's an interesting one. I think my mom tried her best with what she had, and like, yeah,
yeah.
like,
Mums do, right?
yeah.
Yeah, mums really do. Um, so I want to know a little bit more about Muay Thai as a young man, because they say, the first 7 years, a boy is, the mums, and the next 7 years, the boy is the dads. And then after that, you need to find some kind of mentor because the boys sort of pull away from their parents. And that mentor is what really sort of shapes the next sort of 7 years of a young man's life. Was that your experience? Did you find the safety, the acceptance, the guidance that you were looking for in the gyms? And, because it is a contact sport. So essentially, one could think that, you'd come from this sort of dysfunctional, sometimes a little bit sort of dangerous, maybe a little bit violent thing, and then you've gone into fighting. Did you find, I guess, that mentorship there? And was it a good outlet for any of the frustration that you felt from feeling out of control in other areas?
Yeah, entirely. And there's the evidence that supports this. Like, I've done some research for different projects over the years. And I did this body research for UNESCO some years back, and we found like martial arts programs all around the world that were helping young people, whether they were literally in refugee camps, or they were in Belfast, or they were in the Bronx, or they were, here in New Zealand. And Because there is lots of like benefits that come from structure and discipline, particularly if you come from a environment where there's no structure. Like young people need healthy boundaries, and if you're not getting them at home, third spaces like a martial arts school or a Muay Thai gym can provide that. And so for me, like, yeah, there was a fair amount of dysfunctional behavior around me in my home life. So I kind of really gravitated towards, I met this guy, John, when I was like maybe 19 or 20, John Conway. He was my coach. He went on to be my coach for 10 years after I'd been doing Muay Thai for a bit. And so he was real strict. Like I had to be at the gym at like 6:30 in the morning and then back at the gym at like 6 p.m. And like he put heaps of structure and discipline into my life. And I learned about setting goals and saying no to sideways distractions, and I started becoming humbly successful in a small country in a sport that wasn't what it is now. And when I decided that I wanted to go back to university in my 20s, I basically took the template that made me a successful Thai boxer in New Zealand to being a successful academic,
Yeah.
and yeah, I'm really
Knowing that
grateful to
it takes time, dedication,
goal setting,
prioritizing. Yeah.
getting enough sleep, eating well, staying away from alcohol and drugs, hanging out with goal-oriented people. Like those little things I took from Muay Thai and kickboxing and applied it to university and then have applied it to pretty much everything else in my life, right? It doesn't have to be
Yeah.
Muay Thai. It doesn't have to be like a violent sport. It could be like
No.
I don't know, your crumping community. It could be your performance dance community. But
Yeah.
you're right. Like as young
It's
people
just a
get older,
space, I
they
think,
do
that you
need
feel accepted and you feel like you have something to offer and
yeah,
you get something back.
validation and community back,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
we all need that. And alongside sport, I obviously had this whole musical subculture where people had DIY bands and made fanzines and organized concerts, and there's a lot of like productivity, And
Yeah.
I see a lot of young people now who are kind of not being productive, and they're like lost and kind of adrift, and they spend their time alone on screens, gaming, or like the faux connection of social media or gaming consoles, and it's quite sad, It's like I think
Yeah. It's so hard. It's really hard to parent, and we're seeing it as like as a whole, as a generational thing. And I actually saw this research recently that was saying how year on year comprehension and overall sort of learning intelligence has grown for the last 60 years. And since they brought in devices to schools as like a norm, it's actually started going
decline.
down. It's because we're designed, we're hardwired for connection and to learn from each other. And once we take it into this thing, like even though all of the knowledge in the world is inside these little devices, the way our brain absorbs the information is very different because it's less experiential. And that's, I think that's just one of the issues, and you've just led beautifully onto the direction I want to take this conversation is you are having conversations, you are speaking to young people, young men, you are in schools, you are in gyms, you are mentoring. What are the biggest issues that you are really seeing, I guess, young men facing as they try to navigate manhood in 2026?
Situation of any group
Yeah.
of people. I think we do have to be mindful that there are like these macro societal factors that affect our choices and our exposure to different harmful ideas, values, beliefs, but if I'm trying to think across averages, uh, kids drink less alcohol but do more drugs, like hard drugs. I spoke at a pretty affluent school recently, and one of the educators there, one of the teachers there explained to me that kids can like order up drugs off menus, get them dropped off via Uber, you know, and
What kind of drugs are we talking about? What are kids doing? I mean, are
like
they
everything, like everything, like
can they afford Coke? Like, or are they looking
well,
at like ice, pee, like that sort of stuff?
like I said, it goes back to like your socioeconomic situation, you know, like if you've got like
What you can
affluent
afford.
parents, yeah. But
Yeah,
yeah,
wow.
kids use
But you're in the
and
rooms, Richie. Like, you know,
yeah,
let's just put a caveat on this conversation that you're doing the work in the rooms. You're having conversations with kids who are
I
opening up to you
be,
because you're cool. Because kids don't talk to me because I'm not cool.
well, it's funny, right? Because the teacher was telling me this, and then I have kids who might be getting in a bit of trouble referred to me by either police or parents come to the gym, and they'll tell me the same stuff, you know, which is again anecdotal, but we would call that qualitative data, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, kids can get access to all manner of hard drugs. I think social media and the norms that social media present is a
Yeah.
huge problem for young people, boys and girls. You know, kids meeting up for like school fights or fist fights, or kids getting jumped and then it's getting filmed for virality. I think the sexual norms that like pornography and sexual content, OnlyFans have inculcated in our across society are leading to poor ideas around consent, respect, mutual pleasure.
Mutual
Uh,
pleasure. Yeah.
it, um, it's often really degrading and hurtful, and I think sex has become really transactional in hookup culture with apps at the interface level. Poor mental well-being, you know, more and more kids are on mental health medication, attention disorders. Uh,
I mean, it
yeah,
sounds bleak. It sounds really bleak, you know,
yeah. I mean,
and
I look at like I'm working with the kids who have problems, right? Not always,
yeah,
often.
sure.
And when you speak at the school, when they say there's 1,000 kids here, not all those kids have all of the stuff I'm listing off, right? I'm talking like
But I think
the at risk ones who get brought to your attention, all right? I do think like most kids are more knowledgeable about all manner of social issues, and they're more engaged. They've got I definitely see an improved conversation around mental well-being and emotional expression.
even
They're,
if they're not at risk, right? I think that this is the shit that's in their heads, right?
mm,
So even if they don't outwardly struggle with it or they're not getting tripped up by it and then getting into trouble, this is the stuff that kids are trying to make sense of as they move, you know, into adulthood, which is, you know, how do I fit in sexually? How am I attractive? Am I lovable? How do I fit in to my peer group so that I am, you know, median? Nobody wants to be the tall poppy or be like a loser. So like, how do I fit into this like specific gap where I feel safest within my, you know, my peers? And I think also like that real fear about, you know, the future and where they're going. Like this is the stuff that I'm kind of sensing in my home. And I mean, my own son has really stopped talking about feelings, fears, all of that sort of stuff in the last, you know, year or so. And I just think he used to be such a sensitive kid. Where are all of the feelings going? Because we know that they're there. Um, Talk to me about like the, you know, the Andrew Tate kind of rhetoric and the online radicalization. Like, what are you seeing around that sort of, I guess, programming of young men of what it is to be a man today?
I think some of that fear is becoming overblown. I think as adults catch up to what kids were looking at 3 years ago,
Yeah.
we've kind of like missed the boat. And then it's not cool for a kid. Like most kids don't think Andrew Tate's cool that I've
Yeah.
experienced, right? Like they'd be like, oh, he's cringe now. But Andrew Tate did start a wave of like these performative, hyper masculine social media influencers who are trying to sell you a course or present an image or get you to subscribe to their channel or monetize the streams that you are, you know, viewing. he kind of like opened the floodgates in that, as far as I can tell. And there's some recent research from Movember, the Institute, came out and said that a lot of the ideas, concepts, ideologies of the manosphere have now swept across social media and kind of like into the mainstream. So you might not be an explicit neo-masculine influencer. You might be a gym guy and talking about like aesthetics and how to get big or whatever it might be. But some of the ideas that you are espousing are informed by this broader online ecosystem, and they're not especially healthy or helpful around like working hard and being really stoic and being really tough and subduing, like, don't be gay or don't be talking about your pain or whatever it might be. So it's about how do you help young people have like, a critical lens that all this information and role modeling that they're consuming gets filtered through. And I think that starts with like Socratic questioning. Why do you think that? What do you feel about that? Or how does that make you feel? What do you like about this guy? Or what are you getting from this channel? We can rush to like censor or ban individuals, but that kind of makes them cooler.
Or attractive.
Yeah. I really love that what Australia's done with social media ban for under 16s. And I see more and more countries. I think Spain announced this the other day, and the UK looking at doing it. I think that's really important. Kids aren't designed, humans aren't designed to absorb so much stuff.
No. I
It's
feel it
reckoning.
myself, Richie, like I get online and I see, like there's wars here, there's starving children there's like Epstein, which is a whole load of what the fuck. And then there's like,
Yeah.
eating babies and there's all of this stuff. And suddenly I feel my nervous system
Yeah, me too.
just begin to clench and tighten. And I'm like, I don't know what to do with all of this information before breakfast.
Well,
And
yeah.
it feels like the world is a really, really unsafe place.
Yeah, but
When
you know
in
what?
actual
Like,
fact,
it's
if I shut it down,
yeah,
my life is nice. Like my life is beautiful.
exactly. And there's this real pressure from like activists on the internet to scream at others who they've never met, who are divorced from like time, space, and reality, who are like, why aren't you speaking about this? Why aren't you calling out this? Why aren't you posting about this? It's like, fuck off. Like, like I've got my own kids, I've got wife, I've got like economic issues. Who the fuck knows what's happening in anyone's life?
Yeah.
Who are you to appreciate absolute strangers who you perceive as some sort of like platform to talk about the individual issue that you care most about? It's like,
Yeah, I've had a bit of that. I was told it's my responsibility. I've been told it's my responsibility as somebody with a platform to talk about X, Y, Z. And I'm like,
it's
it's
actually
not. It's actually not.
because
Yeah.
none of us are capable of covering everything,
No.
It's like, okay, dear activist, why aren't you posting about this, and this? It's what, like people.
I also don't know enough about everything. Like I know bits about stuff and then I'm like, oh, I need to disengage from that.
This is just kind of just find you posting about this, and you, Danielle, might be like, well, I don't know. Could you explain it to me? Could you teach me? And the same sort of person who says, why, will be like, it's not my job to educate you. It's like, okay, then, cheers. It's ridiculous, dude. And none of that's good for our mental well-being. And like you say, like you turn off your phone, your life's great. I went for a run today, hit the bag at my gym for an hour, no problems, felt great. Picked up my phone, couple emails, saw some Instagram, instantly feel like a little distressed again,
Yeah. It's overwhelming.
And so
These little devices are overwhelming.
If we as adults who've had a lot more life experience, who actually grew up in an era without social media, so our brains are not quite as, I guess, damaged by them. If we struggle with it, imagine what our young people are struggling with, right? And then young people are identity building and looking for role models, and we're all shaped by culture. We have magazines and music television and the radio, and now kids have social media on their phones 24/7, 365, streaming into their brains. Of course, that's going to cause some sort of negative outcome, at least some of the time. People who say otherwise drive me crazy.
Yeah.
Impassioned rant.
So talk to me about what lands most with the guys that you're talking to about I guess, your story and where you're coming from, because nothing lands with when I'm trying to talk to my own kid or my own kids. Like, what is it you think about you and your story that is piquing their interest and helping them to, I guess, look at things in a slightly different way?
Well, again, I guess it depends on the audience that I'm talking with, right? Okay, so I run a program. No, I don't run a program. There's a great organization here that they call the Grace Foundation. I really love. They're a faith-based organization, been around for a while, who provide housing to people who are involved in the criminal justice system, right? I've worked with them since before COVID. Started off just like one session a week, doing some Muay Thai for fitness for a group of women who are, on ankle bracelets or whatever. And then that's grown to now I'm doing like 4 or 5 sessions. I'm helping them develop like a violence rehabilitative program, and I guess bringing like an academic lens to some of the broader work that they run through their organization. But sitting on the mats with the boys at the Muay Thai gym, we often do like 45 minutes of Muay Thai and then 10 minutes of like peer support conversations, right? We'll talk about like alcohol and drugs, or what is consent, or just discussing, uh, our relationships with our fathers. And with those boys, by boys, I'm saying like 18 to mid 20s, or 17 to mid 20s, maybe 16 to mid 20s. It's like just the relatability, like I'm Lebanese European and they're all Maori or Pacifica, and the superficiality of our skin color doesn't get in the way of we know what it's like to feel like let down or scared but of our dads. We know what it's like to have the police come around. We know what it's like to like visit your dad in an institution. Like, we empathize as human beings about how, and I role model as a Muay Thai instructor that actually you don't have to be tough all the time. Like, I'm older now, but like I used to be like good at perpetrating violence in a controlled setting, right? And if you grow up a culture to think that's cool, like a lot of young men do, and then you meet someone who's done that, but then it's like, yo, there's way more to being a man than throwing a good hard kick and smashing someone. Like, you actually need to know how to be a loving partner and respectful, and you need to know how to be a good father. And, if you want to be better for your kids than your dad was for you, like, you kind of get to bypass their defenses, I suppose. I always say it's a Trojan horse. They come for the Muay Thai, but then when you start talking about life honestly and take off the mask of masculinity that we all put on to protect ourselves, myself included, they see that it's possible too. Like in a lot of masculine settings, whether that's a high-powered stock trader or a gang pad, you're performing your manhood and masculinity in order to be impervious to attack, right? And that how that looks depends on your socioeconomic setting in life, I imagine. But we all do it. And when you give dudes the permission to, at least for a second, take that mask off and they don't have to stop performing and be genuine and vulnerable and feel feelings that aren't anger or happiness, then they actually really appreciate it. Do you know what I mean? And then
Yeah.
say you're talking to I don't know, you're talking to like a middle class school, mixed ethnicity, and you're just giving kids questions to ask about the world that they're navigating. They appreciate it because often the time no one's done that. No one's told them about, yo, porn's everywhere. You can't say porn's abnormal. Porn's normal, but it's not healthy. If you're like, yo, porn's actually not a healthy. I sent this kid once who was genuinely interested. He had so many questions in front of all these other students. Like, what if you want to be like the best, like best at sex? What do you want to be, a mean lover? Like, what if you want your girlfriend? And I was like, yeah, the man, that's like a great aspiration, but porn is not going to teach you how to be good at sex. It's going to actually teach you the opposite. or this red pill shit that young men get fed. Like, that's the opposite on how to present yourself if you want a relationship with someone. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you follow the influences of, I don't know, like this dude Richard Cooper, who I did this debate with on over here in New Zealand. He's this Canadian, massive following, like hates women, you know, like he'd argue otherwise. But if you follow the influence, something like that, you're not going to have a healthy long-term relationship, or you're not even going to like necessarily talk to a woman because it's like, what? Right? Like you just you're like, what do you want to be? Do you want to be like a fucking awesome memory for the girl that you date in high school or that you meet at university? Oh, yo, when I was young, I had this really cool boyfriend. Is that how you're going to be remembered? Maybe you could live happily ever after. Chance to say you won't, but it's cool to be
Yeah,
reflected
but yeah,
upon.
and it's about the
And
kindness and the connection and the
yeah,
yeah.
whether that's how you date and being romantic or paying attention and genuinely listening or being a great lover and all of the above, right? Because you're not going to be a great lover if you don't know how to listen. You're not going to be a great lover if you don't know how to communicate. You're not going to be a great lover if you don't care about what the other person is into. So you want to be a great lover, you learn to spend time building a genuine connection, right? And our society, it's the society that adults and media moguls and social media and massive companies that make hundreds of millions, billions of dollars have created, don't normalize much of that. It's like all very transactional, impersonal, dehumanizing, objectifying. So we've got to ask our young people, yo, so this is culture. How does that compare to who you want to be? That's kind of what I do. This is what, I ran this workshop the other day. And I was like, what do you think makes a good man? To a group of boys who are like 14, 15. Fucking great list. Like being kind, not giving in to temptation, being empathetic, being good to elderly people, one young man said, like being, standing up for the little guy, all this great stuff, like tons of stuff. And then you go, okay, cool. Well, what do you hear in the music that you listen to? What, And the boys are like, oh, you call women bitches, and there's lots of songs about shooting people and selling drugs and, okay, well, who are some male role models that you can think of in mainstream society? Andrew Tate makes a list, but then it's all these stereotypes like Arnold Schwarzenegger, who actually is quite a positive dude as far as I can tell.
Sure.
I like listening to him on Instagram, and he's lived a life. Hasn't been perfect, but he's actually, I think, more positive. But there's all these stereotypical good guys, muscular, good at sports. Like their public persona is the stereotypes of masculinity that we know can be self-limiting. And you just ask them to ask themselves, like, well, here's what you told me is what you think makes a good man, and I presume you aspire to be like, and here's what culture every day is telling you. There's a mismatch here, boys. So it's on you to reject some of this stuff and lean into some of this stuff. And if the bros around you are more over here in the negative, find bros who are over here in the positive. Or be the positive dude, because I tell you what, when you speak up for what you actually think, feel, how you want to be, you're actually giving all the other bros around you permission to do the same.
Which is so terrifying, though, to be the one. When you're a 15-year-old boy, it's terrifying to be the one.
Well, it is. It is. And I guess that's why I've always positioned myself in the counterculture,
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Amazing. I want to talk about, in Australia, I think, gender violence, I think a woman dies every, 1.5 women a week, I think. And the problem is huge. It's so pervasive, and I don't think enough is being done. But I also think nobody knows what to do. Like, what are your views on where it's at, on the mattress side, where it's at? I imagine it's not much better in New Zealand, to be honest. What are your views, and what can we do?
I think we do know what we need to do. I think it's reasonably well established that you need to work on multiple things, right, at the same time. My favorite voice is Jess Hill in Australia. She wrote a great book called See What You Made Me Do, and I was a guest on her podcast some years ago. she fronted a documentary called Asking for It on SBS a couple of years ago, and they filmed some of my work in Australia. I'm a big fan, and I'm not just saying this because she's like highlighted my work, but because she actually has challenged some of the status quo of thinking about violence prevention strategies. So you have Our Watch, who do, I think, a great job over there. But their key mantra, unless it's changed very recently, is violence is always a choice. And that is the traditional thinking, right? And I would have come to disagree with that over years of professional practice. Violence can be a choice sometimes, but some violence is quite reactive. Some people who grew up getting beaten up every day by their own fathers or exposed to violence are actually victims of male violence who are going on to recreate the cycles that they are born into, right? So you ask, what can you do? What early intervention pathways are we putting in for young men specifically, boys specifically, who are exposed to family violence, so they are less likely to go on to continue that cycle of violence? What pathways to trauma-informed education? What pathways to if you're sexually abused as a child, if you're exposed to sexual violence as a child, if you're exposed to pornography as an infant or a toddler or whatever it might be, if you're exposed to violence in the womb, we know that rates of violence actually go up for women when they are pregnant or they are in the first 2 years postpartum, which is heartbreaking, right? Because men who are more likely to be violent, jealous of the attention, for example, that the child now receives. So how do you help a man like that who's been acculturated to, say, believe that men have to be dominant, violent, emotionally self-repressive? We call that like a gender transformative approach to violence prevention, changing our gender norms around masculinity. That's part of it. But how do you help a man like that go through a long-term intensive educational body of work so they start deconditioning what they might have been brought up with or exposed to? So how do you help a person like that have more emotional regulation because they're neurologically impaired from inception. I think it's inception. Well, at least through the course of the world, right? A bit of life.
Sure.
How do you help people develop anger management tools? Jess wrote a really great quarterly essay, I think last year or the year before. Why are we still allowing alcohol advertising for, I believe, like the AFL? Neighborhoods that have got more liquor shops in them have more violence in them because it's actually, there's a combination of anger, masculine norms and stereotypes, trauma, and alcohol that contribute to family violence, sexual violence. Like, we know all of this stuff. You just need like a concerted effort to put more tangible things on top of the cultural transformative stuff. I work in the cultural transformative space. I work with boys to help them challenge their gender norms, to know that it's right to ask for help, that respecting women is actually fucking cool, that porn is a terrible role model for how to be a young man, how to be a great sexual partner, that porn's really, an anti-empathy tool. That in real life, like, you can't just punch people when you're angry, whether that's a dude who looks at you funny or your girlfriend when she cheats on you, right? Like, but you actually also have to help people understand you can de-escalate yourself. How do you teach people who might be more impulsive for whatever sociological reason to find emotional regulation tools because they've never been taught that? Or if you grew up in a highly traumatic environment like I did, you're more likely to be explosive, right? You go from 0 to 100. You're operating from the emotional part of your brain rather than your frontal cortex. So how do you help someone learn to do some box breathing real quick so they're not smashing a hole in the wall or raising their voice or throwing plates, right? Like, we can put all this stuff in place. We just need like a concerted cross-party long-term policy in place, whether that's in Australia, New Zealand, or elsewhere, right? How do you
The whole
regulate
damn world. Yeah.
Well, that's it, right? Like,
Yeah.
in Afghanistan, for example, the Taliban have made it essentially legal to seriously assault your wife. Maximum penalty, 15 days in prison, right? It's like, it's bleak reading. Like,
It's awful.
yeah.
Until we make it mainstream, until it comes into schools as the kind of learning that we just we just give kids. I think that this kind of emotional literacy and self-regulation is probably more beneficial to a successful life than half the shit they're learning in the current curriculum. But it's still not being prioritized. I think that, I mean, I'd have to imagine, Richie, that the schools that have you come in and talk must be quite progressive, because the stuff that you're talking about is somewhat, it's quite edgy for you to be talking about. But I imagine it's easier for you to get into those schools than it is the government schools.
Not sure. In Australia, I've spoken a lot through the Catholic system and like Geelong, for
Yeah.
example. But I've
Yeah.
spoken at state schools in Melbourne as well, mainly in Victoria.
Amazing.
And
If there are
I've
any
been, I've,
schools listening to this, like, get Richie in. Like, our
yeah,
boys need this, right?
I've actually been really impressed by it, as far as I can tell, like
Yeah.
what Australia is doing, right? And New Zealand is a bit more haphazard, as far as I can tell. You do have a more cohesive approach to this issue in Aussie than we do here. But here, yeah, it can be hit or miss depending on the school. But it's across economics too, right? Like, I've worked in schools from all deciles, and they all mean the best. It's just a matter of, I just think that there needs to be legislation in place to make this sort of stuff part and parcel of all curriculum everywhere, rather than pick and choose.
Yeah, agreed. You're also speaking with the Rise Above Trust. You're speaking to guys who are already deep in the cycle, right? You're speaking to guys who are either, pre-trial or waiting for sentencing. I think you said that. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah.
What is it? What is it that you find? Like, what is it that they need to hear for you to crack through their armor
It's all the
to
same.
begin to
It's
change the same
it's all
stuff?
yeah.
Yeah.
It's all entirely the same stuff. It's entirely the same stuff. It's if you're using violence in your relationship, what are your core beliefs around violence? What are your core beliefs around gender relations? And how do we shift those? What are your pathways to looking after your mental well-being? What's your relationship with alcohol and drugs like? What are we doing around the violence you might have experienced? It's all the same stuff. It's just got to be prolonged. It's not. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it does, because ultimately the same issues that cause the dysregulation in teens is the same stuff that makes them grow up to, have the behaviors that have never been unraveled or unpicked through doing the work, right? So
Yeah, precisely.
and I imagine that, the conversations that you have, like, sometimes our developmental age or our development stops around times of trauma. So even though you're dealing with men, you're actually dealing with the wounds of boys still.
100%. Yeah, I work with like grown men who are kind of really intimidating looking, but they're just wounded little boys on the inside, and you have to carry grace for them.
Do you think in this generation, in our lifetime, we are going to be able to make significant moves to fixing the problem and breaking the cycles?
Gender violence.
Yeah, of toxic, let's say, masculinity, the issues with stereotypical masculinity creating this disconnect for men, and also gender violence.
Where we are, I think we're not making any statistical reduction in gender violence, right? Whether that's sexual violence or family violence. But we are starting to have like meaningful conversations. The fact that you're talking to me in Australia and I'm here in New Zealand about this sort of stuff, that is a big deal. Like, we didn't do this 20 years ago. Are we changing gendered norms and having conversations around things to allow boys to step outside of their box? Also, yeah, that's that's happening. I think we're still at like the beginning phases of that. Maybe the last 5 to 10 years. No, that's wrong. People have been doing this work for a lot longer than that. It's becoming more mainstream, perhaps the last 10 years. Excuse me. Is that gonna, like, pay off in my lifetime? Probably not, right? But I'm not, um and I'm not unoptimistic. What do you say there? I'm not pessimistic. That's what
Yeah.
unoptimism is. I'm not pessimistic. It's more that I'm trying to be part and parcel of a change-making movement that allow my kids to live in a better society, right? It's it's, um, it's long-term work. You know, we've lived in a world where men's violence against women has been normal for time immemorial. Okay, that's not gonna change in a decade, 2 decades, 5 decades. But it can change if we continue to have conversations like this, if we continue to put educational things in place. If we start, critiquing broader culture and preventing access to it for young people, Like change is always possible. It just takes time.
Perfect. Well, I opened this conversation, Richie Hardcore, by saying that you are doing the good work. And I'm going to close it by saying exactly the same thing. I think you're amazing. I really appreciate your time, your candor, and your big thinking on this big stuff. So thank you so much for your time
Thanks,
today.
Danielle. Yeah, you're
My
welcome. I
pleasure.
appreciate it. It was nice to talk with you.
Likewise. He came from a tough upbringing and he made a choice that the violence stops with him. And that choice wasn't just about not drinking or not hitting inappropriately with his fists. It was really about doing that deep, uncomfortable work to understand where violence comes from and then using his own story to help boys who are growing up in the same wreckage that he survived, or even just boys who need a little bit of help to understand. What I really took away from this conversation is that breaking cycles doesn't happen by accident. It happens when someone makes a conscious daily choice to be different. And when someone stands up in rooms full of teenage boys or incarcerated young men and says, I know where you're coming from, and I know there's another way, like this is how the change comes about. The boys that Richie works with aren't getting radicalized by Andrew Tate. That's 3 years ago and super cringe now, apparently. But they are still swimming in a culture that tells them that real men don't feel things, they fight things. I was shocked to hear kids ordering hard drugs off menus getting delivered by Uber. And, they're still learning that sex from porn. They're still learning sex from porn, and that is teaching them the opposite of intimacy. Really, our boys are desperate for someone to give them permission to take off the masks of masculinity and just be human, allow themselves to be the person that they were or are inside before all of these tropes about masculinity were impressed upon them. So here are your 2 thinking points for this week. What messages about masculinity are your boys absorbing? Like, where are they coming from? Are you aware what stories that they are living? Are there ideas coming from their peers or from social media or from the culture around them? And what's the gap between who they really are and who they think they need to perform being? And the second question is, are you having these hard conversations with them? Because if you're not talking to your boys about consent, about emotional regulation, and about what it means to be a good man, someone else is. And that someone might be selling them a course on how to be an alpha, or showing them that, violence or, all of these different stuff is how you solve problems, how to be a man. Maybe this work isn't going to pay off globally in our lifetime, but it matters. It really matters, because every boy who gets told that it's okay to cry, it's cool to be kind, that it's okay to feel and you don't have to prove your manhood every single day, is one less man who might hurt the people that he loves. And that's worth fighting for. I'll see you next time. Thanks for being here. I hope that you enjoyed listening to this episode of Big Stuff as much as I enjoyed recording it for you. Now, if you did enjoy this episode, it would really help me if you wanted to share it with just one person that you think is going to get something out of it. And also feel free to drop a comment. All of these things really help podcasts to gain more ears, and that's what we're really here for. Also, be sure to subscribe, then you will never miss an episode. If you want to find out more about me, who I am, what I do, then you can go and check me out at daniellecolley.com.au. I'll see you next episode for more big stuff.